Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to the show. Glad you could join me once again for Ask Away. Now, as I have in my pinned message in the chat, and as I say every week at this time, if you are in the live chat and you have something to say to me, or especially if you were going to be super generous and throw in a super chat or something like that, please, if at all possible, hold on to that stuff until I get through the patron and member questions, because as always, I will be answering those first thing. My wonderful Patreon patrons and YouTube channel members have submitted questions for Ask Away ahead of time, and I'm going to go through those to start with. And then once I get those done, I will turn my full attention for the rest of the show to the live chat. We can talk about whatever you want, and I will pay my full attention to all of you in the live chat. So here we go. Let's start with the patron and member questions. And the first one of those comes from my very good friend, with whom I really only have one major disagreement. David Colby could keep going, but ran out of characters for the submission form. And strangely enough, the question deals with the subject of our one major disagreement. So here's what David says. I'm not exaggerating when I say this. Strange New Worlds is a vile show, smugly patting itself on the back for doing a hacky don't ask, don't tell parable without having a single queer character in the entire main cast, and having their only openly queer character be a non-binary queer character who is introduced by lying about their identity, claiming to be about diversity while taking the example of anti-xenophobia storytelling in Star Trek and making them into faceless, mindless, locust-like, and not to mention incredibly stupid and poorly written xenomorph ripoffs, trying to cachet into Star Trek fandom while doing he eat bacon jokes about Spock. Vulcan culture is famously deeply inspired by Nimoy's Jewish heritage, and they made him eat bacon, Steve. I just can't comprehend the unadulterated fan love for this hateful, hateful show. It's like watching a bunch of Star Trek fans walking out of Triumph of the Will going, wow, that was so well shot. What cinematography? Well, to be fair, there's really not much else to be happy about in Triumph of the Will. And it's not even, I mean, the cinematography isn't even really that great. Like there's other Riefenstahl movies that I think are much better looking than Triumph of the Will, but your point is well taken. I don't know what to tell you other than we just really read that show differently. Like I have explained why I don't have a problem with the way the Gorn are presented before. It basically boils down to, Captain Kirk is the one who gets the story where he realizes that Gorn are people too and deserve mercy, and Strange New Worlds is set before that period. So that is sort of, and I mean, we get little glimmers of that in Pike in the season finale when he starts to wonder, like, could we possibly communicate them? Is there a way to reach them? It feels like we're sort of inching down that road with the Gorn in Strange New Worlds. But no, that doesn't bother me. And the other stuff, the point about Angel, the non-binary character who is introduced under false pretenses. I mean, I get that. I see why people have a problem with that. And I think it wouldn't be as much of a problem if there was a wider variety and a greater number of queer characters being represented, not just in Star Trek, but all over the place. And it wouldn't be having one of them be introduced as, a bi character who lies about their identity and sort of inadvertently or unintentionally reinforces that stereotype about bisexual people as being duplicitous or being, sneaky or whatever. I don't think it would be as much of a problem if that kind of representation weren't quite as rare as it is. But so I see that as an issue, but it's not the kind of issue that makes me think, oh, the people who make this show, this is a vile show. Like I just don't read it that way, and I don't, you know, I'm not nearly as upset by these things that you're upset by. But I'm very sorry that you are not enjoying the show. But then again, you're a Lower Decks fan, so what do I really expect? Here's what I love you, David. You're a great guy. It's literally the only thing we disagree on. Well, I guess there's two things we disagree on because you like Lower Decks way more than I do. So we disagree on two related things. the relative quality of two current Star Trek shows. But other than that, I think we're on the exact same wavelength, and I think you're great. Thinking Cat, I think you need to review this show next. And then there's a YouTube link. As Sapphire and Steel is a British TV series that was late 70s to early 80s involving the spirit world, cosmic forces, time travel, and even extra dimensional immigration. You have never seen anything like this one, as it's creepy, imaginative, and with two great leads, the passionate and friendly Sapphire and the icy, grumpy Steel. It's almost beyond description and has a fantastic cliffhanger ending. Well, I will add that to my list of things that I may watch at some point in the future. I can't promise I will ever watch it or ever get into it, but I do genuinely appreciate the suggestion and the link. I will make a note to try and watch it at some point. Black Cover 95, I realized I'm having a problem. I can't remember why I formed the opinions on figures/politics I did. Specific examples to illustrate my points escape me, leaving me with a vague feeling not backed up by facts. They say that Trump supporters' political support is based more on vibes than actual love of policy. I don't want to come off uninformed, especially to apolitical centrists whom don't appreciate my views. Any advice? I would say it doesn't matter if you can remember why you formed the opinions you have in the first place, as long as you can articulate why you still feel that way. And if you can't come up with ready examples, then maybe that's something you need to take some time and think about. It doesn't hurt every once in a while to sort of conduct an audit of of your of your thoughts and feelings and opinions, and try to sort of identify, like, what are my beliefs and how did I come to this, or what is it that makes this a reasonable belief to me, you know? And yeah, like, I don't necessarily know if I could narrate the origin story for all of my progressive beliefs, but I can articulate what they are and why they're important to me and why they make sense to me, you know? And if you find yourself unable to do that, then, that's something that maybe you just need to take some time and figure out and just sort of go back over it. And, not in the sense of like, I wish I could remember what made me think this in the first place. That's not as important as why do you think it now? What is it that justifies it to you now? And once you figure that out and figure out how to articulate that to other people, then, I think you'll be doing okay. And look, the fact that you're even being this thoughtful about it already kind of puts you ahead of Trump supporters in my book. Like, do you think they're having any sort of insecurity about, gosh, why do I think the things I think? They don't fucking care. They're not doing any sort of self-reflection. So, good for you for doing that and for even being concerned about it. And I think you'll be okay. Something tells me I think you'll be okay. Joe C. Hi, Steve. While watching your video about Enterprise's Carpenter Street, it occurred to me that a bunch of Starfleet personnel captains have had to drive ancient automobiles due to some time travel shenanigans. I think that Starfleet Academy should have a course to train cadets how to drive/fly ancient vehicles for their inevitable time travel. I was amused that young Jim Kirk in Strange New Worlds had no problem throwing around that zippy orange sports car, while old Jim Kirk in TOS could barely drive the flivver on the gangster planet. Maybe he skipped class the day they taught clutch manual transmission driving. Yeah, I mean, I kind of enjoyed the fact that Kirk in the Strange New Worlds episode could drive the car with no problem at all, because it subverts that expectation. If you come to it as a Trekkie and you remember Kirk trying to drive in the original series, you have the expectation of, oh, here we go, he's not going to be able to drive the car, and then he does just fine with it. So it kind of subverts that expectation, which I enjoyed. But yeah, I like that idea that Starfleet should teach, time travel driving through history, so just in case you find yourself thrown back centuries into the past, you need to know how to drive 20th and 21st century Earth automobiles, because that will be a useful skill for you when you find yourself thrown back into the past. That's a funny idea. Matt L. So as of this writing, I haven't seen the finale nor your reaction, obviously, but will have watched both by air date of the question. Overall, with all of Strange New Worlds done for the season, what was your favorite and least favorite ep this season? Where do you hope season 3 goes? Well, I've been thinking about this because not this coming week, not next week, but week after next is when I'm going to do my overall review of the season, because Jason and I did our episode reviews as the show was coming out. So I'm not going to do like my own individual episode reviews, but I am going to do my own sort of overall like cumulative review of the entire season. Um, I think my least favorite episode is still the first one, is episode 1 of season 2. That just didn't. I mean, it wasn't a bad episode, but it didn't work for me like the other episodes of the show have. I feel like it was just got the show off on the wrong foot. Was not their strongest outing by far. So that was my least favorite. My favorite, might be this year's Wacky Spock episode. I really like, even though they made him eat bacon, David. I think my favorite episode might be the Wacky Spock episode. I thought it was funny and clever and just delightful. And there were little moments in there, not just for Spock, but for a lot of the other supporting characters. Pike had some great reactions, you know. I really, really liked the silly Spock episode. And I kind of hope that doing a silly Spock episode is something that they try to feature every season, because I think that would be a neat little treat, you know, as long as they're good, as long as they continue to be good. But yeah, the silly Spock episode was the highlight of the season for me. I found it just delightful. And the time travel episode as well that we mentioned in the previous question, tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow, with La'an meeting alternate universe Kirk and going back to 21st century Toronto. That was a fantastic episode. That is also, I think that one and this year's Wacky Spock episode would both be series highlights so far for me, and franchise highlights for this phase of the franchise, for this current generation. I think they would both rank very highly for me. Where do I hope season 3 goes? I mean, I'm very happy with the show as it is. So if they just keep going the way they've been going, and the quality level is maintained, I will be a very happy Trekkie with season 3. I mean, other people have mentioned this. It's not that big of a deal to me, but it would be nice to have more visitations to Strange New Worlds, you know, more sort of Planet of the Week episodes, because the show has done well with those in the past. In the first season, there were several of those, and I think they all came out very well. And there was really only one of those this season, the episode where they revisit Rigel, where Pike had been many years before, and his former crew member had, you know, crowned himself king and all that, and they were losing their memories. And that, again, that was a very good episode too. I like that one a lot. But that's really the only quote unquote Strange New World episode on Strange New Worlds this year. So I would like, you know, some more of those would be nice. Fewer legacy characters. I mean, I feel like now that they brought in Scotty, which was like, okay, fine, you know, like, again, I keep saying, like, as long as it's good, do whatever you want, as long as it's good. But it does feel like, okay, you know, the universe is not that small. We don't need to have everyone who winds up under Kirk's command show up on this show at some point. Like, it's okay. We don't need to see Scotty. Scotty seems fine. We don't need to see Scotty. You know, we can just say Scotty came aboard at some point after Kirk got there, or right before Kirk got there, or whatever. Like, they don't all need to sort of gather on the show. So I would, you know, cool it on the legacy characters in season 3. I mean, because, like, it's not like they don't have enough already. Like, there's plenty of legacy characters there already. We don't need it. We don't need more. And personally, I would be much more interested in seeing Pelia continue on the show in season 3 than have Scotty. I mean, assuming even if Scotty continues to appear on the show, that doesn't mean they're going to make him the chief engineer already. I mean, they could do the same thing with him that they've done with Kirk this season, where he just kind of pops up every now and then, if they wanted to do that, which, again, I would recommend against that because I feel like the show does enough of that. But I'd be way more interested in getting more from Pelia as the chief engineer because we really didn't get that much from her this season. She had a couple of memorable moments, and Carol Kane was very good in whatever scenes that they gave her. But I would love to see more of her because she's, first of all, she's a fantastic performer, and second of all, the character just seems interesting and seems like she has potential. And we didn't really get to see a whole lot from her, from looking at the season as a whole. So I would much rather see more from her than see Scotty. I feel like I know Scotty pretty well. I've seen plenty of Scotty over the years. I have not seen that much Pelia, and I'd rather see her. Kier can't wait for Trump's Georgia vacation to start. Would you rather have a new Star Trek series based on a relativity-like time ship exploring and correcting anomalies, Sliders, where someone builds a mirror universe transporter, but it goes to multiple alternative universes, or a Millennium Man show where an android travels the daily life of a Federation citizen for 1,000 years? That last one, I'm not sure what the series is. I mean, I guess you could maybe do it as like an anthology show where because the android lives so long, like each episode could just be like a separate little sort of sketch of a different period of his life, and you could have so much time to choose from, that might be something if you do it like that. That sounds interesting. I would say the relativity like time ship, as long as we create the series with the understanding that it is not going to be an excuse to just fuck around in the canon and revisit familiar places and familiar characters, that it would be a time ship, exploring the timeline and correcting anomalies, but that these would be stories we have not seen before and people and places we have not seen before, rather than using it as an excuse to, just do nothing but fan service. As long as that is understood, then I would go with the time ship thing. Because I've kind of thought, I mentioned before, a couple years ago, I did a video where I referenced the great, the great 1990s syndicated sci-fi action series starring Dale Midkiff, Time Tracks, which is not quite the same thing because he doesn't go back and forth through time. He goes from the future to the past and then just kind of stays there, but he's hunting fugitives who are hiding in the past from the future. But, I've thought, if they want to continue to do Star Trek shows and maybe they want to change it up every now and then, and instead of just doing another sort of variation on Star Trek, they could do something like Time Trek, where instead of exploring space, the ship explores time and is tasked with, preserving the timeline and that sort of thing. I think that might, I'm honestly surprised they haven't attempted to do something like that yet, but I would go with that with my previously stated caveats in place. Stephen G. Clenard. Hey, Steve, what's your favorite obscenity? Do you prefer classic 4-letter words, or do you get spicy with hyphenated, anatomically unlikely imprecations? I bet that once you get going, you really talk a blue streak that could make a sailor blush. Of course, if you had something meaningful to say, you wouldn't need to resort to foul language and shock value. Do you kiss your mother with that mouth? Shame on you. Anyhow, my favorite obscenity is poop. For some reason, when I say poop, it feels way, way filthier than when I say shit or any, actually obscene word. It's hard to go wrong with fuck and its many endless variations. It's the most brilliant word in the English language because it's so versatile. You can use it in any situation. It can be any part of speech. It can express so many different emotions. It's the best word. Fuck is the best word. But in terms of like, what's my favorite obscenity to say, is probably cocksucker because of those K's in there. Like, it's just, it feels good to just kind of, to just sort of, cocksucker, if you're really angry or frustrated. The problem with it is it's a problematic word, not just for being an obscenity, but because it refers to oral sex and someone who performs oral sex as though that's a bad thing. Like you're using it as an insult, you cocksucker, like that's a bad thing. And it's not a bad thing, as I think we would all agree, whether you are giving or receiving, as long as it's in a consensual situation for all involved. It's usually a pretty pleasant thing, right? So why would it be used as an insult? And there's, all kinds of history behind it, and it's homophobic, and it's, like there's all kinds of baggage attached to cocksucker that makes me not want to use it against a person, right? So I usually only say cocksucker against like occurrences or inanimate objects. Like if I'm driving a nail in and I hit my thumb with the hammer, I'll go, cocksucker, or like if I'm trying to fix like if my dryer breaks and I need to replace the belt and it's giving me trouble because you have to stretch it around the drum and then you have to loop it around the thing and hook it onto the little wheel, and it has to be a lot of tension, so it's tight and it's hard to get on right and it takes forever and it's really frustrating. You fucking cocksucker, come on, you know. But because it is like a problematic word, I would only use it against an inanimate object, not like an actual person, because I feel like that would be inappropriate. Also, motherfucker. Motherfuckers, I mean, come on. Motherfucker. Like, that's a great one. So yes, it's hard to pick a favorite, but fuck or some permutation thereof would be my favorite obscenity. Yeah. Charles Benoit, writer strike question. Obviously, writers aren't working on scripts, but do you think many just keep working on scripts since they figure that the strike will eventually end and the scripts will be due and they might as well give themselves a head start? I really don't think so. I mean, there might be some writers who are secretly working on spec scripts for things, or working on scripts that they're hoping to sell at some point in the future, and by the time they get to that point it won't matter when it was actually written, just that they have it. But no, for the most part I think, because that's like most professional screenwriters um are not, like, if you're working regularly and you're able to earn a living through your writing, you're probably not writing too many spec scripts. You're probably writing things that you've been hired and paid to write. And so, no, I don't think they are. I mean, I suppose it would be, I mean, if you're really like intellectually engaged with a project, if you're lucky enough to work on a show or something that you really believe in and you have ideas for, maybe there are some writers who are like, oh, I need to write this down so I don't forget it. I had a really good idea for what our next season could be, or for what a future episode could be, or for what, a particular turn in this character development could be, or whatever. I'm sure that some of that might be going on. Like they're just writing things down so they don't forget, um, but actually sitting down and working on scripts that they like for struck shows that they work for, probably not. No, probably not. I would not think that that was happening. Um, yeah, no, I wouldn't expect that. But it might be worth asking, like an actual professional writer who is in the guild, how that works. But I would imagine, in for the most part, they're not really doing a whole lot of of secret writing. You know, Brian Baker. Steve, I am a writer of mystery fiction and have been for many years. I try not to hoard my work, but the people I have shared the work with have not been as responsive as I would have liked. How does an individual creator like yourself find the ability to put yourself out there and risk rejection and negative responses from the things that you create? Basically, how do you handle criticism, both positive and negative? I wanted to let you know that I appreciate your work. And though I don't always agree with you 100%, you give me something to think about when I am done watching a review, an essay, or even your comedy bits. Well, thank you very much, Brian. I appreciate that. And I appreciate you being a supporter. Um, I mean, for me, like, I take criticism pretty well usually. I mean, if it's a negative criticism and I feel like it's unwarranted or it just doesn't apply, then I just forget that I ever saw it. If it's a negative criticism that is helpful, that points out something that I missed or gives me a new way of thinking about things, or lets me know that the audience is noticing something that I didn't think they would, or that I didn't intend, or whatever. Like if it's helpful in some way, then I'm grateful for it. And there's nothing, like there's nothing to deal with other than, oh, hey, that's very helpful. Thank you. Um, you know, so it's just not, it's not really an issue for me. Like I did a video. The video I did a couple weeks ago, where it's the comedy skit where I play the principal and the teacher who's interviewing for a job as a history teacher in Florida. I got a lot of not a lot, but a few comments um, on that video from people who were criticizing the editing of it, because they didn't think the editing was snappy enough, because it didn't go like boom 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 boom. You know what I mean? It's not edited like a pitch meeting, like you know what I mean? And and that's a valid observation. It's not edited like that, but it's not supposed to be. Like, it's the timing of it is exactly how I want it to be. There are times in the video where the two characters talk over each other, or there's someone says something and someone else responds right away, and it's like, snappy like that. But there are other times where there are pauses, where they're staring at each other, where there's awkwardness, and I wanted that. Like, it came out exactly how I wanted it to be. So when someone says, "Oh, there's too much dead air, you need to re-edit this so that it's snappy," like they're not getting the point I was trying to make. And because those comments are in the vast minority, I can be reassured that most people who watch it uh, receive it the way I intended, that it's not just me in my head thinking, "Oh, that's the right way," and nobody else sees it that way. Most people see it the way I see it and seem to have no problem with the pacing of it and how it's edited. It's just a few people that I guess have this pre-existing expectation that those, when the YouTuber plays two different characters and they're talking to each other, that it's got to be that rapid fire editing, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, with no breathing room. Like, they assume that's the only way to do it. And it's not, and that's not the way I wanted to do it. Um, but yeah, and so for stuff like that, I just kind of sweep it off the table. I'm like, okay, this isn't helpful, this isn't useful, whatever. And it doesn't bother me. I don't feel like, oh no, what if I must have done something wrong. I just sweep it away. Um, so yeah, it doesn't really, like, if I put something out into the world, the only the only thing that gives me anxiety, or that makes me feel bad, or makes me sort of, hit, like punch myself, rhetorically speaking, is if I put a video up and there's a mistake in it that I just didn't see before I put the video up, and now it's too late to fix, and then I see other people noticing it, then I'm like, oh. But that thankfully doesn't usually happen. Uh, for the most part, when I put a video out for people to see, that video is something that I'm at least happy enough with to let other people see. And fortunately, a lot of the time, it's something that I'm proud of and I like and think is good work. And so I put it out there for people to see. So there's not a lot of, like, anxiety as far as that goes for me. I don't feel like I'm risking rejection by putting my stuff out, because when I share it with people, it's because I think it's good, or at least good enough. And I believe in it. So, it doesn't, and again, a lot of that is just the mindset that I have come to through, for whatever reason, because of my upbringing, because of my life experience, because of the way my head works, for whatever reason. Like, that has not been something that I have struggled with. Fortunately for me, but unfortunately for you, because I didn't give you a very helpful answer, I'm afraid. Wolfie Basach. Hi, Steve. Objectively speaking, as the GOP's social ideals have historically relied on a deliberate erosion of any kind of moral or indeed legitimately persuasive policy, is it feasible to assume that, contrary, my brain, wait, did you flush the toilet just now? Me, of course I did. I'm not a 3-year-old. Look, I'm trying to write this week's Ask Away question, so piss off and let me get on with it. My brain, are you sure? You might think you remember flushing, but what if you're wrong and that good-looking woman from flat 6 sees a steaming great pile of your dump and decides you must be the dirtiest sod she's ever met? Me, okay, you win. I'll go and check. 20 seconds later, me, see? Satisfied? Now shut it and let me finish writing to Steve's show. My brain. Why bother? It's a shit question, and he thinks you're a prick anyway. Oh, and I think we left the oven on. And so, Steve, my question now is, do you ever overthink things? Yes. Thankfully, not all that often. But yes, there are times when I experience something very, very much like what you are are making fun of there. Yes. And it's almost always that, did I leave the oven on type thing. It's, I'm pretty sure that I've done something I need to do, but what if I didn't? Am I sure that I did? Yes, I know I did, but what if I didn't? Should I go check? I don't think so. Well, fuck. Yes, fuck. I'll go check. You know what I mean? Like I've experienced that before. Not to the extent that it's like a thing that I have to deal with consistently, but yes, of course. Um, but that's really it. Like I know, I talk with Dana a lot about this because Dana's brain works in such a way that she overthinks things a lot. She overthinks things in ways that I just almost never do. Like in terms of writing, if we're writing something together, or if I'm writing something and I'm telling her about it, or she's writing something and she's telling me about it, and there's a point where like maybe I'm writing a joke or she's trying to crack a sentence that she needs to get just right for something, and you know, I am much more likely to seize on my first solution and just go with that and move on. Right. I'm the one who's like, okay, I need a joke here. What's the joke? What's the joke? What's the joke? I'll think of a joke. I'll go over it in my head once or twice. I'll think, okay, yeah, that works. And I'll go with that. And then I'll move on to the next thing. Whereas Dana will sit on it and stare at it and go through multiple permutations of it and think, oh, what if it's not this? What if it's that? And what if I say this? And then after I say this, I say that, and I keep it going. Like that's just how her brain works. And it works for her, right? It works for her because she's a terrific writer. Um, that's just not usually, and there are advantages because sometimes if she and I are working on something together, sometimes eventually when she gets to the end of that train, she winds up with something better than my initial thing. And then I'm like, oh, great, let's do that, you know? But often our ways of working just are kind of, on opposite ends of the spectrum. And they both work for us. But I'm the type that does not overthink it. And I'm just like, okay, I have a hole here that I need to fill. Here's a thing that fits in the hole. Perfect. Let's move on. You know, so I don't overthink things in that way. But the way you're describing in the question of, like, did I forget something, and sort of second guessing myself and, torturing myself with, are you sure it happened the way you remembered? Are you sure you didn't leave that back there? And like, yes, I have done that before. I have done that before. Thomas James Wright, aka Black Body Economics. Steve, man, life can really fling some shit sometimes. First, I quit working to start a company, spent 18 months coding a massive system to help drug court / rehab clients and lighten the load for rehab personnel. COVID hit. All rehabs and drug courts had to close, so 18 months of hard work just vaporized. The puppies were born, taking up all of my time. Of course, I caught COVID, found homes for 4 pups. Each time it broke my heart. Then, you might remember, Professor, one of the pups we kept, died, shattering my heart. The next week, Lavender went into heart failure, had to raise funds for her heart surgery, which could only be performed at Colorado State, 10-hour drive. My friend died, and nobody told me. Then our roof got torn off. Literally, kitchen and living room are totally open to the sky. Now, my daughter's room just flooded twice in 3 days. Have you ever been through a trauma stack? To know that others have been through far worse is painfully humbling. Well, yes, of course, just as it's humbling to me to hear that story from you. I mean, no, I have fortunately never been through anything remotely like what you have just described. No, we're like catastrophe upon catastrophe upon catastrophe, just, on and on and on. That has not happened to me, thankfully. Um, and yeah, you're right. It's humbling and kind of numbing if you really think about it, that things are even worse. Things are significantly worse for many people, even than what you're describing. And you're describing a pretty rough run of bad luck, right? Um, I'm sorry you have had to go through that, and I would not wish that on you or on anybody other than, a real piece of shit. Um, and it's terrible to think that people have to deal with much worse than that. But no, thankfully, I have never had to go through something like that, or numerous somethings like that. And I hope you're doing okay with everything. Best of luck with your new roof. And now the flooding of your daughter's room. I hope everything works out okay. I hope you're able to deal with what you need to deal with there. I'm very sorry to hear about all of the parts of it that I hadn't heard about before. And yeah, I hope that you're okay. Yeah, yeah. I would say I hope that you keep your head above water, but that feels like that would be in poor taste. So I didn't say that. Joe McClory, who has a "This Machine Kills Fascists" sticker on his car for context of the anger. Boy, I love that so much. So there is this new song the right is pushing through the country charts called "Rich Men North of Richmond." Don't bother if you haven't heard it. So I was looking at a post about it, and a stranger wrote, "Woody Guthrie reincarnated," about a man who wrote a song that has a full verse blaming overweight people getting assistance for the plight of the working class. Guthrie was an open socialist back when that was not a safe thing to be. The man wrote a song about Jesus being killed for feeding the poor. I don't know if an opinion can be more wrong than that. So I am, perhaps a bit unreasonably, mad. And well, you have said that you are also a fan. Would you be interested in venting a bit with me here, where there will be less hate bombing? Keep Guthrie's name out of your fucking mouth, random internet stranger, and fuck your fat phobic classist song, Oliver Anthony. It just doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be just Steve. Feel free to vent with me in the chat and comments. Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I love Woody Guthrie. I love Pete Seeger. I love a lot of those old folk singers from the 40s and 50s and 60s, almost all of whom were radical leftists and sang about, things that leftists were singing about and talking about and agitating about during that period of time, and still are today, but particularly during that World War II and post-war era, about economic justice and racial justice and unionization and pushing back against militarism. I mean, just yeah, the idea that Woody Guthrie would be associated with a song like that, with those kinds of ideas and values, um, is gross and ridiculous, you know. And it just goes. I have an idea for a video that I'm going to do probably in a few weeks, and it's something that I've talked about before, and it's not a new idea, but it's just the lack of media literacy on the right. The idea that there are so like the example that I keep coming back to is the fact that like Chris Christie is a huge Bruce Springsteen fan. Paul Ryan is a huge Rage Against the Machine fan. And it's like, how can you be a right winger and listen to music and love music and idolize the artists who make the music that is about what a fucking asshole you are and how wrong and awful and destructive and dangerous your beliefs are and your policies are. I mean, Christ, how many songs has Bruce Springsteen written over his career about how shitty it is that Republican political policies and economic policies have fucking hollowed out the working class in this country? Now, he doesn't say it in those literal words. He's telling stories and he's using analogy and metaphor, which is probably why most of them don't fucking get it. He's just singing about how great his hometown is and how much he likes it and how sad it is that it's not the way it used to be. Yeah, that's what that song's about, you fucking moron. Um, you know, like how can you love these artists? I mean, that have done music that is just all about how fucking wrong you are. And Woody Guthrie and Pete Seeger and those old, the Almanac singers, those great old folk singers from, generations past, like it's the exact same thing. Fucking "This Land Is Your Land" is is about how the country belongs to all of us and we should all have an equal share in it, and we should all be able to take pride in it as feeling a sense of belonging and ownership in it. um you know regardless of our economic status, of our race, our religion, whatever, like, this land is your land, this land is my land. It belongs to all of us, right? That's the idea. And to hear that song, or to hear the man who wrote that song, and as you alluded to in at the beginning, like, the dude had "This machine kills fascists" written on the front of his fucking guitar. He's not the same as the fucking rich men north of Richmond guy. They're not in the same universe. It's ridiculous. It's fucking ridiculous. And it's insulting to Woody Guthrie. General Contact Unit Problem Child. I've been dealing with super bad anxiety recently, and as a result, I've been drinking more. Sometimes when I'm really drunk and super anxious, I'll wake my dad up in the middle of the night, rant at him about how awful I feel. My father is an older man. He's 62, and I think it's perfectly reasonable for him to be mad at me for doing this. But he can't express his frustration without being ableist. You're a fucking, and then there's some censored words. I'm autistic, so I feel I have the right to repeat those words, but I block them out because I know you'd rather not. Yeah, I appreciate it. That, or he'll gaslight me by saying everyone I've given money to online is conning me, or claiming I've been telling everyone online he's a bad father. For the record, I've criticized him in my online communities anonymously, but I always tell them he was a good father to me generally. How do you deal with someone who expresses legitimate concerns, but expresses them in a toxic way? I mean, it's a tough situation because you're right there. I mean, normally what I would say is just leave, or stop hanging out with that person, or stop being around that person. But I don't think that's an option for you, which makes it a lot more difficult, because the easiest thing to do is to just say, okay, fuck this. Like, even if, because you're right, like, waking him up in the middle of the night and going off on him, he has a perfect right to be pissed at you for that, right? That's unreasonable. That's not something that, like, if you did that to me, I'd be pissed at you too. Hopefully I would not respond with that kind of vocabulary, because that's not appropriate and not helpful and not acceptable, no matter what the situation is. But the emotion behind it, the fact that he's mad at you or frustrated with you or whatever, that's completely understandable and reasonable. But if, as you say, he is incapable of expressing that frustration without being insulting to you and ableist and derogatory in that way, and you can't just say, okay, you know what, this isn't healthy, I'm fucking with you, you're fucking with me, let's just see less of each other. Like, if you can't do that, then I'm not sure what to do, because my skill set is very limited when it comes to dealing with that kind of thing. You can approach him at a moment when you are not as angry, and try to just talk sense to him in a calm, intelligent way, and try to express to him why him talking to you like that, and trying to undermine your confidence, and tell you that all these people are taking advantage of you, all these people are taking your money, and trying to guilt trip you. I know you talk shit about me on your internet communities. I know you tell everybody what a shitty father I was, blah, blah, blah. If you can explain to him why that is unacceptable to you and get through to him that way, great. If you do that and it doesn't get through and it doesn't make any difference, at that point, I don't know what else to tell you, other than, if at all possible, try to make preparations to not have to be around him as much, but, if that's not a viable option, I'm not sure what to tell you, my friend. I wish I did, but I really don't. Yeah, I don't know. And I'm sorry that you're feeling the way you're feeling, and you're taking it out on your dad. And then I'm sorry that he is taking it back out on you the way he's doing. That sounds like a terrible situation. And I'm sorry that you have to be in it. Brian McKinley. Hi, Steve. Have you ever seen the horror classic Night of the Lepus? I think it would make a great episode of your review podcast with Jason. DeForest Kelley fighting giant killer bunny rabbits is truly a spectacle to behold. P.S. I would love to be part of the live online chat during the show, but I work work Fridays. Well, hi, Brian. If you're watching this later, I'm sorry you can't make it on Fridays, but thank you for being a supporter and thank you for the question. I have never seen Night of the Lepus. Would you believe that? I have not seen it, but I've heard of it. I know generally what it is. I was aware that DeForest Kelly is in it. Maybe it's something that Jason and I could do one year for one of our monster movies because every October we do spooky movies. Um, Maybe we could do it for that one year. Maybe I don't know. Yeah, I've never seen it, but it sounds delightful. I'll have to remind myself to try and catch it sometime. But yeah. Thank you for the suggestion. Agent Meister, who is formed in the space between light and shadow. Peldor Joy, Steve. In the last Ask Away, I made a reference to Modest Mouse, which had you swooning over the band and their discography. And that prompted my question this week, i.e., how do you listen to songs? Let me elaborate. I recently realized that I have no idea what the vast majority of songs that I listen to and love are about. I don't know the lyrics. I love them for the sound and tempo of the music, the cadence of the singer's voice, guitar riffs or drum solos, etc. But rarely do I know the lyrics to my favorite songs, with the exception of the chorus in a lot of instances. One exception would be Gordon Lightfoot's The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald or Billy Joel's The Downeaster Alexa, both of which tell compelling stories. Do you have the same experience with songs, or is it that everyone is different? Also, can I recommend Jon Stewart's 1987 album Punch the Big Guy? I feel compelled to tell the world about this beautiful blend of rock and country. Give it a spin sometime. I will check that out. Thank you. I don't think I've ever heard that. By the way, Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald and Downeaster Alexa, both awesome songs. I especially love Downeaster Alexa. I'm a huge Billy Joel fan, and that is a great song. Um, so yeah, I mean, a lot of it depends on the song. Um, I generally tend to either notice lyrics or be interested in the lyrics of songs I like. If I hear a song for the first time and it grabs my attention and it gets in my head, and I can't suss out the lyrics like after just listening to it, I will often go look up the lyrics. I'm like, well, I wonder what the hell they're singing about. Like if I can't hear it just through the song, I am very interested in lyrics, and most of my favorite songs and favorite singers, songwriters, musicians, whatever, are at least able lyricists, if not great ones. Like they can get by with their lyrics. The lyrics might not be blow you away amazing, but they're not going to be, but they're not generic. They're not actively bad. They're pretty good lyricists. Um, Neil Young is an example. Neil Young, I think I'm attracted to mostly for his vocal quality and his instrumentals. He's a great guitar player. He has great bands. I mean, Crazy Horse is a great band, and some of his albums and some of his individual songs have fantastic lyrics, like Russ Never Sleeps, his famous legendary album with Crazy Horse, one of my favorite albums in the whole wide world. I love Russ Never Sleeps, and the songs on that, for the most part, are really, really well written, top to bottom, music and lyrics. But some of Neil's stuff, the music is there, the music is fantastic, the lyrics are good enough. You know what I mean? The lyrics are good enough that it doesn't pull the song down, but you're really just there for the music and for his vocals, for his singing, because he has such a wonderful, immediately recognizable voice. So there are some instances like that, where I truly love an artist and their lyrics are either consistently, or like with Neil Young, sometimes they're great and sometimes they're and it's kind of, you know, hit and near miss, if you want to call it that. But it depends on the artist. It depends on the song sometimes. But I tend to gravitate toward artists whose lyrics that I really do appreciate, along with the music. Like if you have great lyrics, but the music's, it's like with anything. It's like with movies or comic books or whatever. Like with okay, I'll use comic books as an example because there's usually more of a strict division of labor. Traditionally comic books, obviously there are comic book artists who are also writers. But for the most part, comic books there's the artist and there's the writer and they collaborate, but one does the writing and one does the art, or there's a team that does the art. But there's the art and there's the writing. And good art can elevate bad writing, and good writing can get get the message across through bad art. But if the art is too bad, it doesn't matter how good the writing is. It's going to be a shitty comic book. And by the same token, if the writing is so fucking terrible, the art is not going to be able to make up the difference. So it, you ideally you need both, and I think it's the same thing with music. Marge Irene Buttercup drag queen alter ego. I wonder who this could be. I know who it is because I saw the email address, but it's anyway. Hey, Steve, Strange New Worlds has introduced Martin Quinn as Scotty. And while I'm 99% on board with this new actor, there is something missing, or rather not missing, if he is to step into James Doohan's shoes as this iconic character, his right middle finger. Do you think Strange New Worlds should just ignore this, retcon it, lop the offending finger off with a butcher's knife, or remove it digitally, pun not intended, in post-production? I mean, I think we're missing the obvious thing that has to happen, which is we need season 3 of Strange New Worlds to be a continuous, heavily serialized 10-part series that is all about how Scotty loses that finger. That demands an explanation. We need to not just an explanation, but it needs to be the focal point of the entire series for multiple episodes, until we get the explanation of why Scotty seems to have all of his fingers in Strange New Worlds. But by the time you get to the original series, there are maybe one or two incredibly fleeting glimpses of James Doohan's hand that reveal that he is missing a finger. This needs to be explained. The entire canon of Star Trek will collapse like a house of cards if this inconsistency is not resolved in detail, in exhaustive, minute detail in season 3. So I demand that. I demand that. Let's see here. Next is an always tired some random geek. I'm sorry, my friend. Well, Steve, I've decided to cancel more of my subscriptions. Not going to spend money on food for myself except for top ramen and whatever I can mooch off from my family. Got to figure out how to save more money. I already work 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, and so far work is okay with that. But it is still not enough. This Monday, Joanna was completely out of money for food for her and her trans NB son. I gave her my last $37 I had last night, got paid today. I have to do this because it constantly feels like there isn't enough folks with the means to help out Joanna, Phoenix, and Joey. Or is it easier for me to spend less on myself than to bother others? How much money do you make? Do you have any extra cash in between paydays? What's your credit limit? Are you maxed out yet? I can't ask others to charge up their credit cards as much as I do. I mean, can I get folks to commit to regularly giving money to Phoenix, Joanna, and Joey each paycheck? I don't know. I mean, I'll just tell you what I've told you before, which is I admire you doing this and I admire your commitment and your determination to keep helping your friends as much as possible. But, and it seems like you're making some concessions by not spending as much on food. Just don't be careful, not just in terms of your financial situation and the amount of debt you're in. I mean, that kind of is what it is at this point. But if it gets to the point where you are depriving yourself of food because you want to have more money to support your friends in need, I mean, I think at some point you have to say, there's only so much I can do. And even though they're my friends and even though I care about them and even though I want to see them, have enough to get by on, it is not my responsibility and my responsibility alone to support them. And you need to be able to take care of yourself. And I'm not saying you're at the point where you're starving yourself or whatever. I mean, you're making adjustments, you're cutting out expenses that you feel like you don't need, and you're giving that money to your friends in need, and I think that's great. But just don't get to the point where you're exhausting yourself. Other than, I mean, you're physically exhausting yourself now, but don't get to the point where you are running yourself, to the point of total exhaustion and ruination in order to take care of your friends. I get the impulse. I think it's admirable. I think it's fantastic that you want to do that. And I mean, God, if I were in your situation and I had friends who were as in need as Phoenix and Joanna and Joey are, I would feel the same way, and I would want to help them too. But I would also try to recognize that I need to take care of myself. Um, so that's, I mean, and I've said that to you a whole bunch of times, and I don't want to repeat myself too, extensively, but, just make sure that you leave enough room, that there's enough left over that you can take care of yourself. Okay. So anyway. John Burns, hey, last time I mentioned that I doubt that Ron Perlman was going to apologize. Bob Iger threatened people's houses. Well, Bob threatened them right, or Ron threatened them right back. When Bettman threatened to shut down the NHL, Chelios threatened Gary Bettman and the welfare of his kids. See the difference? I mentioned an NHL comment by Chelios. You know what happens in the NHL that's not allowed anywhere, right? I never suggested Perlman should apologize. My question, are you aware that there's video evidence that at least one power company is responsible for the Oahu fires? Might want to check out their video evidence. I have heard this. I have not gone through and like actually watched the evidence, but I have heard that apparently there is reason to believe that it was down power lines or something that started the fire. I mean, boy, it just really changes the way you think of the power company, doesn't it? Because, usually you think of the power company as being just, above reproach. I mean, look, it's those fires are devastating. I mean, you look at those photographs of what it looks like in the aftermath, and you hear about how many people that they know of were killed in them, and it's horrendous. It's horrible. It's a tragedy, and to think that it may have started due to negligence on the part of a power company, I mean, that's even worse. Like, that's a public utility that's something that needs to be kept up and maintained for the public good. And hearing that it may have contributed to this horrible disaster is incredibly frustrating and maddening. So yeah, I have not seen the video evidence, but I have heard and I've seen people talk about it, that this might be. I think I saw it mentioned on CNN maybe yesterday morning or the day before yesterday. But yeah, it sounds awful. It sounds awful. You know. Yeah. And I still don't know. Like, I don't know what Chilio said about Gary Bettman's kids. So if it's different than what Ron Perlman said, okay. But you know what? If he didn't want someone threatening his kids, maybe he shouldn't have threatened to shut down the league. How about that? Honestly, almost everything I've heard about the NHL recently has been through you. So I appreciate you keeping me up to date on the NHL and the recent history of labor disputes in the NHL. Michael Ridra is still hooked on my adventures with Superman. Well, I'm right there with you, buddy. I watched the new episode just a couple hours ago. I found it quite amusing that after I asked you what villain you wanted to see in my adventures with Superman, and you told me Mr. Mixyez-Pitalik, the very next episode had him. Obviously, a very different take on him. I was wondering what you thought about it. I must admit, I was a bit disappointed that they didn't defeat him by getting him to say kill Tipsy Zim. And I think I'm a bit over multiverse plots in general, but at least this seemed to be limited to one episode. On a different note, the League of Loises sounded so much like some classic Silver Age gimmick to me that I was legitimately surprised to discover it was original to this series. I always dig some Silver Age vibes. Yes, I liked this version of Mixie. You're right. He is a little different than what we've seen before. But I thought he was good. And yeah, if you're going by classic Mr. Mixyez-Pitalik from the comics, then it's like a Rumpelstiltskin thing where, you can only defeat him if you trick him into saying his name backwards. And they didn't even address that. Like, this version apparently they just skipped that entirely, which is fine. It's their show. They're doing their take on these characters. And if they wanted to just do a different version of him, keep the troublemaking imp from another dimension bit, and just leave out the, you have to get him to say his name backwards thing. Um, Maybe that is sort of a, if you can't do it, don't do it situation. Like maybe they brainstormed to try and come up with some clever ways to, that Superman or Lois or whoever could trick him into saying his name backwards. And they couldn't come up with anything, or they couldn't come up with anything that they thought was good enough to do on the show. So instead of doing a subpar version of it, they just said we'll leave it out. And if that's the case, I respect that, because like I just said, if you can't do it, don't do it. Or at least don't do it until you can do it. But yeah, I thought it was a good episode, and I loved the League of Lois Lanes so much. That might be my favorite concept that this show has featured so far. It's just, you're right, it's a total Silver Age idea. It's just perfectly goofy and fun. And I mean, it's like a super team of Lois Lanes drawn from parallel dimensions, from the many Earths, and they're like this multi-dimensional super team of variants of Lois Lane. It's just such a weird, fun idea. I love it so much. And yeah, I assume it'll just be a one episode thing, or if they come back, they might like recur on a very limited basis, but I wouldn't expect to see them like pop up every week, nor would I want them to. But yeah, it's just like, I think I remember watching that episode last week and thinking to myself, when they introduced the League of Lois Lanes, I thought, if I didn't love this show already, this would make me love this show, because it's such a funny, clever, absurd, creative idea. It's great. It symbolizes what I love about the show. It's everything that I love about the show in one concept. So yeah, I was a big fan of the League of Loises. Kara, hi Steve. There's been a lot of coverage of AI for use in creative writing. Do you think that this is likely to become a thing? Personally, the idea of using AI software to write a book terrifies me. I admit that I tried ChatGPT and didn't find it particularly helpful. But do you think that the writers' actors strike, do you think with the writers' actor strike that this could become a thing? That Hollywood could just input a whole load of memes, tropes, plots, etc., and the AI could churn out plots without the need for writers? I would hope not, but I'm beginning to despair of both Hollywood and Disney Plus. But I would like to hear your thoughts on this. Personally, the idea of using AI to write one's book frightens the bejesus out of me, Kara. Do I think it could become a thing? Yes. I think, as far as using it in the movie business, or using it to, to write, plots for movies or TV shows, the arrangement that I have heard being sort of unofficially proposed or pondered, right, by studio executives, is that they would use an AI not unlike ChatGPT, or maybe literally ChatGPT, I don't know, to come up with plots, or come up with like the equivalent of what might be like a treatment, just sort of like a kind of general summary of what the story of the movie would be. And then they would hire a human writer to come in and work off of that. So you're getting the initial idea. So basically, you don't have to pay the human writer for as much, and the human writer doesn't get credit for as much, because the human writer doesn't get an original story credit, because the original story, or quote unquote original story, came from the chatbot. So they're just sort of rewriting what the computer came up with. So you don't have to pay them as much, and they don't have to work as long. And it's that, it's all about squeezing the writers and squeezing the creative people down as much as possible, so that they only have to pay them the absolute minimum that they have to pay them. That's really what it's about. It's not so much about, I mean, eventually, if the technology gets to that point, then yeah, they would love to use it to just flat out replace human writers and say, let AI programs write scripts. I don't think we're near close to that point yet, but we're moving in that direction. But right now, like Chat GPT as it is, because like I've played with it. I did a video about it earlier this year, um, where if you are very creative with the way you write your prompt, you can get it to spit out some stuff that is not exactly what you would call good. Like it's not good writing, but it's good enough that with a little bit of rewriting or with, you know, a talented enough performer, you could take it and make something out of it. You know, it still needs a lot of intervention from an actual creative human being, but it gives you something. It gives you enough of a starting point that you can make something out of it. And you know that knowing the, I mean, just taken it out of context, just in and of itself, that it's like a fun little toy. You know, it's like it's a neat thing to play with and go, hey, look, a computer did this, right? Um, but it becomes terrifying when you learn the intentions that some people have for it. Like if you would think that, like, if I invented Chat GPT and I controlled it, and then I heard that like studio executives were hoping someday to use it to replace human writers, I would smash it with a sledgehammer. Like that, that's never what I would have intended for it, and that's a horrifying prospect. Um, but yeah, you know, that's one of the things that's why I really hope that the unions don't budge on that sticking point. Like, and that apparently is one of the big sticking points in the negotiations, that the writers and the actors want, um, a provision in the new bargaining agreements that will prevent studios from doing that kind of thing, from pursuing AI in such a way that it could be used to replace human artists. Because apparently they need to do that. They need to have it in the contract that the studios aren't allowed to do that. Because if they are allowed to do it, they will definitely be trying to do it. Because they are not creative people. They are driven purely by profit. They see movies and TV shows and all art in general, no matter what the medium, as commodity, as product. That is all they see it as a thing to create that they can sell, period. So they need to be stopped from replacing people with AI. So yeah, I think we're kind of on the same page here, Kara. CMAC, the slowly reappearing and not quite late. Greetings, Steve. So we've had 4 indictments with over 90 charges. While it seems likely the January 6th case may go first, I'm almost hoping Georgia goes first, as they allow cameras in the courtroom. I can only imagine what that would look like. It might be the only thing to break the grip. Thoughts? Oh, and on your Delaware video, 3 electoral votes and 2 blue senators. Careful, man. Yeah. A couple of other buzzkills pointed out that if Maryland were to reclaim Delaware, as I proposed in my completely serious video that I put up a couple weeks ago about it, then yes, the Democrats would lose 2 senators and we would lose 3 electoral votes. And Delaware is a reliably blue state. So yeah, okay, I guess we shouldn't do it. Fuck. I mean, we could just let Maryland have 4 senators. I'd be okay with that. I'd be very okay with that. Can Maryland just have 4 senators and 3 more electoral votes? Let's just do that. Why can't we do that? Anyway, yeah, I mean, the the Georgia trial being televised is intriguing. You know, knowing that Trump could get like his version of the OJ trial, that would be satisfying. I don't know if anything will break the grip on the people that are still with him. To be honest, like the people that are his base, that are ride or die with him no matter what, if they are still by his side after all this, after all these years, I don't think anything will shake them loose. But a televised trial where he is revealed, you know, in detail over many weeks of the presentation of the prosecution's case to to be the con man and the fraud and the criminal that he is, might that cause a few of his rabid cult members to drop off? Maybe, maybe. I guess we'll see. And hopefully it'll be sooner rather than later. And let me see here. Russell. Hey, Steve. Oh boy, choices, choices. I'm going with my Star Trek question today, but I really watched a cool video on YouTube on the Incredible Hulk, which I might come back to in 2 weeks. Please do. Anyway, here it goes. A topic that was brought 2 weeks ago got me thinking about the doctor versus the EMH. And based on what the rest of your questions is, I think you meant to say data versus the EMH. But anyway, um, yes, I know we sort of covered this one in one of your reviews, but the fact is, Data did try and shoot Faggio and then lied to Commander Riker, suggests his ethical program was okay with it. However, in Voyager's latent image, the Doctor suffers a breakdown. Got me thinking about the two characters. Data learns by experience, and the Doctor learns by adding new programming. Would this make Data more human? Oid. Than the Doctor. Sorry, not sure when I will run out of my 1,000 words, but that is the gist of my question. It should be noted that both Data and the Doctor had their ethical program removed for a brief time, Data in Descent and the Doctor in Equinox, and both seemed sorry it had occurred. Then that was that. Thanks. Well, I think the big difference uh, between Data and the Doctor is Data, and I don't know if this makes Data more human or not. I think it makes Data more human by design. I don't know if the end result is that one is more human than the other, but Data was built and intended to be a sentient life form. That was Dr. Sung's goal from the beginning, was to make a person. Data was supposed to be a person from the very beginning. The Doctor in Voyager is programmed with a personality, and is programmed to interact with people. But I think it is strongly implied that the Doctor becomes a person as a result of being used so much and being on so much, and just through his accumulated experiences. He was not like the EMH is not intended to be a sentient life form. The EMH is intended to be a holodeck program that interacts with people and provides services to people, not unlike any other holodeck program. Like, not all holodeck programs are people, are sentient, conscious people with inner lives and thoughts and feelings and etc. But the Doctor on Voyager is, at least at some point he is. After a certain point he is. So I think that's the big difference between them, is that the Doctor's consciousness, the Doctor's personhood emerges over time as he gains experience, as he adds new programming. Whereas Data, we can say maybe he becomes more human as he goes along. He comes to understand more about what it means to be a life form, to be a sentient, sapient being. But he is that when we first meet him, and he's supposed to be that all along. Like, that was his creator's original intention. The Doctor, not so much. The Doctor becomes himself through circumstance, circumstances that were not foreseen and were not intended. So does that make one more human than the other? I don't know. But that, I think, is the big difference between them. And last question from Caitlin. Hi, Steve. My question last time has led to me thinking in a wider way about how some people sort of have a timeless version of a character in their head and then get upset when a character behaves differently. Do you think there is any way to prevent against this? Are writers simply doomed to have a portion of their audience fail to keep track of what a character knows and thinks at various parts of the story? This question is both about character growth over a larger set of stories, but especially also people getting confused or angry about why a particular character does something or other just in one particular tale. Anyway, I think I've got some space left over, so I have a delightful comic about the Woodman from Hilda, which hasn't been published anywhere else. I think it even works as a comic with just the first 2 rows. And then there is the address right there that I'll leave on screen for a little bit if anybody wants to go check that out. deviantart.com/mumblingidiot/art/the woodman's head 286-213-156. So anyway, I did not have time to save it and add it into the into my broadcast software so I could just share it with everybody on the stream. But I would highly encourage everybody to go check it out because I did look at it before the show, and it is very well done and very funny. And I love the Woodman because when Dane and I were watching Hilda on Trek Reluctantly, I guess last year, and the Woodman was my favorite character, and the Woodman is very funny in that comic. It's about the Woodman's head and why it's how is it attached to his body if he doesn't have a neck, and what happens if it becomes detached from his body. And I don't want to spoil it, because it is a very charming, funny comic. But anyway, there it is. If anybody wants to type it into their computer machine and see it for themselves. To answer your question, no, I don't think there's any way to prevent that sort of thing. And that's why I think, for the most part, writers should not bother. I think a writer needs to be, or any kind of storyteller, needs to be mindful of their audience in the sense that you need to be able to tell your story in such a way that it will have the effect on the audience that you intend it to have. It will read to the audience the way you want it to read so that it will make sense in the way that you intend. But beyond that, as you need to be mindful of the audience so you don't lose the audience, or you're not talking over the audience, or whatever. You're not confusing the audience when you don't intend to. But other than that, fuck the audience. Fuck the audience. Tell your story. Tell your story the best way you can tell it. The best way you as the storyteller know that it can be told. And trust that if you tell a good enough story, the audience will find it, or it will find the audience. The people who watch it or read it or whatever will get it. And not all of them will. Some of them won't. Some of them won't like what you're doing for whatever reason. But it will at least appeal to a large enough segment of the audience that it will be appreciated by people who are, capable of appreciating it. And yeah, especially with a character like a long-running character that's been around for a while, that has appeared in different media and has been, started and restarted and reinterpreted, et cetera, et cetera. There will always be people who, either haven't been keeping up with whatever the current, I'm sure there are people who are Superman fans who would watch My Adventures with Superman and would think, what the hell is this? Why are Jimmy Olsen and Clark Kent the same age? Why are they acting like this? Why is this character like this when that's wrong? And you know what I mean? There are probably people who Michael noticed and expressed maybe a little bit of disappointment that they didn't defeat Mixyezpitlik by getting him to say his name backwards. But there are probably some fans who would see that and go, that's wrong. They did it wrong, And fuck those people. Fuck those people. There's really not a whole lot you can do about that. There's a saying that you shouldn't do the audience's homework for them. And what that means is, to me, you should give the audience enough in your story that they can understand what's going on and they can get the points that you are making in the story. Like, you shouldn't write something that is so inside and so reliant on other things that the audience can't possibly understand it unless they've been with you from the very beginning. Like, you should write things that are accessible, but at the same time, you shouldn't feel the need to go back and rehash every little thing that has ever happened with your character up to that point. You need to know what to remind the audience of and what to trust that, if they've been watching the show or reading the books or whatever, that, they'll know this stuff and they'll keep it in mind, and it will color what they are seeing now, but it's not something that they necessarily need to be reminded of in order for the story to make sense. So you need to be able to, to juggle that sort of thing. But there will always be people who, like you said, have a perfect vision in their head of what a character is supposed to be, of how they're supposed to behave, of what choices they're supposed to make. And they're so close-minded and so attached to their own personal version of the character that if they read a story or watch a story or whatever, where the character behaves in a different way, they will react badly just because it doesn't agree with their version. They won't even take the time to evaluate the merits of the story they're watching to decide whether they like it or not for any reason other than it's wrong, it's not how I think they should have done it. And as I have said many times already, fuck those people. If you're a storyteller, don't worry about them. They might like what you do, they might not. You might make them happy, you might not. But don't waste a single second of your creative process trying to please them. Just tell the story the best way that you can. So anyway, thank you so much for the question. And again, thank you for sharing that comic. And hopefully everybody's got the address who wanted to look at it. And if not, you can just you can just back up and see it that way. But anyway, so that is it for the patron and member questions. Thank you all so very much for all of those. Now I'm going to turn my attention to the live chat in just a minute. But first, it's time to premiere a new Stuffy and Friends short. So this is the last one of the most recent of the previous batch. Starting next time will be Stuffy shorts from a brand new batch of shorts that I actually just shot these yesterday. I shot 6 more Stuffy shorts yesterday, and I have been editing them yesterday and today. I have 4 of them completely done and ready to upload, and I have 2 more that I will finish, maybe a little bit later tonight or over the weekend at some point. So for people who have been asking, Jack McPherson, the little drunken foul-mouthed Irish teddy bear, he will be in a few of the new ones coming up. He's not in this one, but I believe he will be in either the next one or the one after the next one that I'll be showing in upcoming Ask Away live streams. So anyway, please enjoy the newest Stuffy and Friends short that will go up as a standalone YouTube short tomorrow, but I will debut for all of you watching live right here tonight. Check it out. Is that mystery novel you're reading still good?
Yes. In the previous chapter, the police inspector arrested Dr. Proctor for the murder of Nurse Mertz after he recovered the murder weapon, an ice pick.
So Dr. Proctor punctured Nurse Mertz?
But that's not all.
There's more to Nurse Mertz's malicious murder?
Maybe. They also found DNA on the murder weapon belonging to Mr. Bowman's personal assistant, Kyle Carson, and an eyewitness came forward to say that he saw Dr. Proctor take money out of Mrs. Pepper's stolen purse and give it to Carson the day before Nurse Mertz was murdered.
So Dr. Proctor pilfered Pepper's purse to knife cash to bribe Bowman's butler, Kyle Carson, to commit the killing?
Conceivable.
Unbelievable. Ta-da! Hope you enjoyed that. That was fun. It was fun to do. It was fun to make. All right. Now I will turn my full attention to the live chat. Hi, everybody. 25580. I'm sorry if I answered the wrong question. I actually waited until today to paste the questions into the doc because someone complained last time that they had changed their question and I answered the old question. So I mean, I don't go once I paste your question into the doc, I don't go back and check it. You know what I mean? So I apologize if you had changed your question and I didn't get it. I waited until the day of the show to paste the questions into the doc that I used to show on screen. So I apologize that I missed your updated question, but just be aware of that for future reference. That I don't, I don't once I collect your question, I don't go back and double check just to make sure that you changed it. So I'm very sorry. Black Cover 95, am I writing for BoJack Horseman? No, but that is a very BoJack bit now that you mention it. I didn't think about that, but yes, that is a very BoJack bit because they did a lot of like the clever wordplay in BoJack. Maybe that was what I was thinking of when I wrote it. Thank you, Geek. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Isaiah Taylor says, would it have been better if James Cameron made a movie about the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald? Obviously, I still love Titanic. I mean, maybe. I don't know. Maybe he still could if he ever decides to do something other than Avatar movies. Joe McClory says, do you think the studios would be willing to let a chat AI steal from them for their competitors without suing them for skirting IP if it meant they could better squeeze writers? Probably. Philip and CMAC. Actually, you know what? I was talking about this one earlier with Dana. Um, Surprisingly enough, it didn't take that many takes. I was worried when I was shooting it, and I was talking about like the tongue twister at the very end, where where I'm like charging through all of the different names. Um, I was worried I wouldn't be able to remember it. I wasn't worried that I wouldn't be able to say it. I was worried that I couldn't keep it straight in my head. But actually, um, I got it pretty quick, and once I had it, I had it. And I did a bunch of different takes of it just to make sure that I had the exact one that I wanted. But I didn't have to do multiple takes because I kept fucking it up, which was surprising. But like once you find the rhythm of it and the pace of it, it's almost like it's like falling down a set of steps. It's like you just do 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 do. So it was fun to do. It was fun to do, and it wasn't nearly as frustrating as I was afraid it would have been when I wrote it. Yes. Um, Oh, thank you, Daryl. Daryl says, last week I was working and this week I dozed off and my internet was buffering, but I'm paying attention to every answer Steve gives. Thank you, Daryl, as well. You should. Super chat from Kirak 2011. So, Steve, I heard I get a 1 minute vid from Stuffy. Oh, do you? Yeah. Well, did you become a patron at that level? Then yes, I guess I need to check my messages. If you want to send me a Patreon message, um, and let me know like what you want Stuffy to say. If you have any particular request from Stuffy, or you just want Stuffy to say hi to you or something, like that's fine. Yes, I would yes, if you became a patron at that level, then yes, of course. If you want a 1 minute video from Stuffy, then a 1 minute video from Stuffy you shall have. Just get in touch with me and let me know what you know what you would like Stuffy to say. And here's a super chat from earlier that I missed from Fat Produce. My trauma stack 2020, mother diagnosed with terminal cancer, watched her die over the next year, bought a house, wife cheated on me, divorce, then dad remarries less than a year after mom's death, finally about to sell house. My God, well, I'm very sorry that you had to go through all of that. Whew, that's awful. And thank you for. It sounds ridiculous to say, but thank you for the super chat. I really appreciate that, and thank you for sharing. Jesus, I hope you're okay. Um, oh, Isaiah, that's really cool. I've started with my Moths creature feature script, 6 pages down so far. That's great. Good for you. Um, oh, I'm sorry, 255 AD. I apologize for that. But again, like I said, I don't, you know, I don't go back over the questions usually after I've already pasted them. But I apologize for that. Um, Brian Baker, Steve, remember when Reagan used "Born in the USA"? Apparently, they don't listen to the lyrics. Yeah, that's a really famous example. Yeah, that's a really famous example where it's like if you actually listen to that song, it's not like a proud patriot. It's not fucking "God Bless the USA," you know, like by Lee Greenwood. It's the opposite of that, which is also why "Born in the USA" is a good song. Um, Black Cover 95, Stuffy OnlyFans. I mean, the dude is naked constantly anyway. Like he's naked in every single video. So like, what more do you want from him? Daryl says, okay, Steve, some people think Joe Biden is a bad U.S. president, but with the emphasis on stamping out ableism, isn't it better to think of him as the perfect president for 2020's USA? Um, I don't know if I'd say he's the perfect president in any context, but I certainly don't think he has been like a bad president. I mean, there's obviously things that he hasn't done that he could have done that I wish he would do, and there are things that he has done that I would wish he hadn't done. Um, and he wasn't my first choice, but I think he's been a not bad president so far. Um, Oh, Brian Breaker says, can appreciation of all art be subjective? I think, well, not only can it be, I think it is. I think there is no other, there is no form of objective art appreciation. There's no such thing as an objectively good or objectively bad piece of art. It's all subjective. It's all a matter of personal experience and perception and taste. So yeah, all appreciation of all art is subjective. Um, Ooh, super chats coming in. Kirak says, "You can't lie, Steve. Superman will always be Christopher Reeve. Who are you? A friend?" Yeah, that summarizes Superman in one line about as perfectly as anything ever has. Stephen G. Clenard says, "I'm going to write some fanfic where Scotty causes an interfederation rift by inadvertently flashing the shocker to Ambassador Sarek." Yes, that's right, because you know what you do is you give her the shocker, and when the shocker don't rock her, you give her the spocker. David Colby says, "I'm back. I had to stop watching your stream to go watch My Adventures with Superman. Did you know the show's really, 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 really good?" Yes. It's fantastic, isn't it? See, we have almost everything in common. We disagree on some Star Trek stuff, but yeah, we agree on this for sure. My Adventures with Superman is fantastic. I like it more and more with every episode. And the new episode was terrific, I thought. And boy, they're really I don't want to say they're dragging it out because that sounds pejorative. They're drawing out the reveal as to who the general is, because I think we all kind of have a guess as to who the general is going to turn out to be. Maybe they'll go in a different direction, but it feels like I'm pretty sure who the general is, and I think most people that I've seen talk about it online, we all seem to have an agreement as to who the general is going to turn out to be. But they're really drawing that out. I kind of thought for a second they were going to drop that reveal at the end of the new episode this week, but they didn't. So maybe next week. Maybe they'll drop the reveal next week and then they'll have to deal with it in the season finale because I think it's 10 episodes. But yeah. I saw someone else with the Mac Attack game clips. Do you like turtles? I mean, I suppose I had better because if I understand cosmology correctly, it's turtles all the way down. So I think I should like turtles. Yes. Kemp Chalmers says, if I become a patron at that level, can I get Stuffy to reenact Tarantino's Pulp Fiction rant? LOL. I mean, that would be up to which rant. And as long as it wouldn't be more than like a minute long. I mean, let's not put too many demands on Stuffy's time. Oh, deathmatch time from Kane 20C. Oh boy, director edition. Werner Herzog versus Stanley Kubrick. God damn it, this is a tough one. Usually your death matches are easier than this. Oh fuck. If you were asking like 18-year-old Steve, I would say I would choose Kubrick in a heartbeat because Kubrick, was my favorite filmmaker and still is in a lot of ways. But now I don't know. I feel like I'd have to go with Herzog because Herzog is more of a humanist. I mean, Kubrick is more of a humanist than he gets credit for. But overall, his films are not super humanistic, but Herzog is one of the great humanists in cinema, certainly of his generation of cinema. And that counts for a lot with me these days. So I think I would side with Herzog. Isaiah Taylor says, "Fortunate Son" is the most misunderstood song ever. Yeah, yeah. Kim Chalmers, I don't mind having furries in my community. I got nothing against furries. 28580. Okay, let me go back and find your revised question. Okay, and I won't be able to show it on screen because I didn't prepare that, but I will find your revised question and I will I will read it and answer it. How about that? Let's see. Okay, here it is. Is it problematic that in Trek, Cardassian society is depicted as efficient and functional, even if they are obviously meant as the bad guys? There's this popular idea that fascism is evil, but they're actually good at running things, i.e., Mussolini made the trains run on time. The Cardassians play into that trope, and I think that's bad because it's nonsense. Some fascists experienced an apparent prosperity boom, but only because they stole resources from the groups they viewed as undesirable and gave them to people you viewed as desirable. Then you just discounted those undesirable people from their reckoning of total prosperity. Also, it's easy to achieve full employment if you just lock up or kill millions of people. In the long run, fascist states tend to ruin themselves by buying into bad economics and governing ideas or getting involved in unwinnable wars they're ideologically incapable of giving up on. In both cases, because fascism requires you to be out of touch with reality. Well, I mean, I think it's a good point in some ways because you're right. They do. There is at least the implication that the Cardassian state, as brutal as it is efficient. Um, and you're right. That is a misconception about fascist states in reality. So I think that's a good point. But the Cardassians do end what you described happening in your question is pretty much exactly what happens to Cardassia in Deep Space Nine. They do inevitably collapse because they join what turns out to be an unwinnable war. Like they ally themselves with the Dominion, and then they go from the fascist superpower that prospered because they hollowed out Bajor to the fallen former superpower that joins the Dominion, hoping that it will be their return to power and glory, but then they just wind up being the ones that are hollowed out by the Dominion. So it's a little bit of poetic justice for the Cardassians. But the point is, their regime does fall in under circumstances very close, or at least broadly speaking, very similar to the ones you describe in your question. So I don't think that anyone watching Star Trek and following the story of the Cardassians will come away with a positive impression of that kind of government. But perhaps they could have taken slightly more pains to let us know that like the supposed efficiency of the Cardassian government was actually a fiction. You know, maybe that would have been a little better. But overall, I think the depiction of the Cardassians and the depiction of fascism through the Cardassians was very effective in Deep Space Nine. Philip, yes, that is my thought as well about the general, about the identity of the general. David Colby says, also, I really dig that they remembered that electromagnetism are linked phenomenon and let live wire chuck cars at people, which is tight as hell. Yes, indeed. I agree with you there. Hand of Omega. Kubrick versus Orson Welles. Oh, man, that's a tough one. I think Kubrick directed more great films than Orson Welles did, but it's hard for me to side against Orson Welles because not only was Welles a great director, he was also a great actor and one of the all-time great raconteurs in the movie business. Like he was Orson Welles, you know what I mean? There's never going to be another Orson Welles. I think I would have to side with Orson Welles in that too. Yeah. Joe McClory says about characters being who are not what people think they should be. The who Luke was optimistic he would not turn into a curmudgeon has never met an old social worker or public defender. Yeah, really. That was one of the most like head scratching responses that a lot of people had to Last Jedi for me. They were like, Luke wouldn't be that way. I mean, we haven't seen Luke for 30 years. So the idea that like Luke and that apparently even Mark Hamill kind of thought it would be like this, that we would meet Luke again after 30 years and he'd be older and grayer and a little different, but he'd basically be the same guy that he was the last time we saw him. That just feels like a strange assumption to have. But a lot of people have that assumption. They want their characters, and people reacted this way to the depiction of Jean-Luc Picard in the first season of Picard as well. And look, Picard as a whole has tons of problems that I've talked about ad nauseum, and season 1 of Picard specifically has problems. But a lot of people were upset because they're like, oh, look at Picard. He's an old man who went back to his vineyard and retired. Why didn't they make him the president of the Federation? Like they had this idea that he had to be in this glorious, powerful position because he was Jean-Luc Picard. Surely he would be running the universe by now, you know? And they were just completely unwilling to entertain anything else, anything unexpected, any attempt to do something new, or subvert an expectation with that character. They just reacted to violently, like, no, that is not right. He shouldn't do that. That shouldn't be, you know. So, you know, there's definitely a lot of that. And Luke in Last Jedi is a great example of that. Saber Feruzi says, I started watching Star Trek Enterprise after watching some of your vids. I managed to get past the intro. It's not too bad. It still feels like normal Trek. Thanks for your videos. They're lovely. Well, thank you for saying that. I'm glad you like my videos. Yeah, look, I make fun of the intro a lot. I do think that I think the opening credits of Enterprise is a good idea. I like the idea of having a pop song instead of the instrumental theme. Like I see no reason why they couldn't do that. I just think the actual song they chose is not a great song, and you know, and is very easy to make fun of. But no, Enterprise is not like a terrible show. If anything, the biggest problem with it is that for the most part, it just feels like normal Star Trek. You know, like I feel like they had an opportunity there, and maybe even through the marketing kind of promised that this would be a different Star Trek. This will be a bold new take on Star Trek. And no, it's basically just Star Trek. And it's fine. And just like Voyager, there are moments where it's fantastic, you know, but for the most part, it's okay. It's fine. Stephen Clenard, Uwe Boll versus Michael Bay. I gotta go with Uwe Boll. At least I mean, his stuff. He makes fucking train wrecks, but they're very entertaining train wrecks. Gedrin Y says Kubrick failed at capturing Arthur C. Clarke's 2001: A Space Odyssey. Well, I think that's probably fair. I think it's Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey. I know there are big differences in the story that it was based on, and then the novel that Clarke wrote, you know, that expanded on that story after the movie was being made. They're different. Kubrick's film is Kubrick's version. I don't necessarily, and by the way, in case anybody doesn't know, I think 2001: A Space Odyssey, Kubrick's film 2001: A Space Odyssey, is a masterpiece. It's one of my favorite films. So I don't fault it because it, you know, isn't a accurate or faithful enough adaptation of the Arthur C. Clarke story. I don't care. Like I judge movies on their own merit as movies. I don't judge whether I don't take points off if they're not accurate adaptations of source material. Oh, Brian, I won't fight you. I mean, look, I don't know if I would say I prefer CCR to the Beatles, but I love CCR. They're a great goddamn band. 255 AD says, I always dislike the episodes when both Data and the Doctor's ethical subroutines are turned off. They stop caring about their friends. That's not actually ethics. It's the thing. Yeah. Yeah, you're right. But, you know, they're robot people, so give them a break. Brian Baker says, what is your opinion on Harley Quinn? If you mean the animated series, I think it's fantastic. I think it's brilliant. I've been watching that too. The new season of that has been coming out the last few weeks as well. I love it. I was a little cold on it the first season. I didn't think it was bad, but I was just kind of like, okay. But by the end of the first season and then into the second season, it really caught on for me. And I think it's been spectacular ever since. I laugh my ass off every time I watch it. It's brilliant. 255 AD says, the thing you said about right wingers lacking media literacy. My dad loves The Clash, even though he joined the UK police under Thatcher. Well, there you go. That's a perfect example. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Fat Produce with another super chat. Thank you very much. Says, a favorite Trek soundtrack. I've made several Jerry Goldsmith edition edits for various Trek fan films on my channel that are fun edits. Boy, my favorite Trek soundtrack. Star Trek 2 is close. If it's not Star Trek 2. Star Trek 2 is great. Star Trek 6 is great. Star Trek First Contact, which is a Goldsmith one, is great. Yeah, I don't know. It's tough. I would probably go Star Trek 2. Star Trek 2, James Horner's score for Star Trek 2 is just is phenomenal. But it's really tough to choose because the scores for the Star Trek movies, especially, and I have to throw Giacchino in there too because Giacchino's score for the Kelvin timeline films, especially the first one, is fantastic. So that kind of flips the table over. I mean, I still think I would go with Star Trek 2. I think I would go with James Horner's soundtrack for Star Trek 2. But it's a fucking horse race because God, Star Trek 4 has a great score as well. Like there are so many great scores for the Star Trek movies. It's ridiculous. But yeah, if I had to pick one, I think I would have to go with Star Trek 2. But it is a squeaker because Star Trek 4, Star Trek 6, Star Trek First Contact, Star Trek 2009. I mean, those are all fantastic scores. Well, yeah, David, the book was being written while he was making the movie, but it was based on an Arthur C. Clarke short story called The Sentinels. Maybe they're referring to that, but yeah, the book in the movie, yeah, the book, strictly speaking, the book is not an adaptation of the movie, and the movie is not an adaptation of the book. They were being done roughly the same time, but it's based on source material that Clarke wrote. Isaiah Taylor says, for Enterprise, I like the Callings Wherever You Will Go song for the intro. Yeah, because they used that in the promos. There was a commercial for Enterprise that used that song, and it worked really well. And then for the credits, they use a different song, and the song they use, for the actual credits of Enterprise, to me, doesn't work nearly as well as the song they used for the commercial. So I do kind of wish they would have used the commercial song for the actual series. Kane 20C, yes, I've seen edits of that as well, where they edit the Enterprise intro with the Perfect Strangers theme song. Also great, works really well. Yeah, Brian, Harley Quinn is great. Is Giacchino pronounced Giacchino? If it is, that's the first I've heard of it. Well, I mean, I will look that up to confirm it, but I always thought it was Giacchino. But if it's Giacchino, then I will start pronouncing it that way. And if that is the case, thank you for the correction. Lucifer writing, that's why they looped that First Contact refrain into the Picard soundtrack, because it's just so iconic. Well, and because Picard season 3 was the opposite of creative, and they said, let's just play a music they've heard before. I hated that. I hated that. I absolutely hated that. If you'll notice, all of the scores that I referenced as being absolute favorites of mine um, were built around original material. Except Jerry Goldsmith does use his theme from Star Trek: The Motion Picture and his Klingon theme from Star Trek: The Motion Picture in his First Contact score. But other than that, it's an original score. It's new themes that he composed for that movie. Star Trek 2, same thing. Star Trek 6, same thing, big time. It's original music. They didn't just go back and like they did for fucking Picard. And look, and I'm not, no disrespect to the First Contact music because I love it. It's beautiful. But the fact that they would just pluck it and they didn't even do a different arrangement. They just literally they sounded like they just played the track from the soundtrack album. And I was like, what the fuck are you doing? How lazy and what kind of fucking hacks are you? You know, let's just reuse the fucking same music from the movie. Don't change it. Don't rearrange it. Don't try to make it make sense in some kind of dramatic context. Just like, hey, it's time for the credits. Let's use the First Contact music. Fuck you. It speaks to the ethos that underlies that season of the show and why I disliked it so much, why I found it so offensive. Because it's like, oh, let's literally just do what we've done before. Let's not do anything new or creative. Let's just do the exact same fucking thing we've done before. Note for note. I did not like it. I did not like it. Hand of Omega general take on the MCU. I'm a big fan of the MCU. I think as a franchise overall, it's been terrific. Um, I haven't liked it all equally, but I don't think there's been any of it so far that I have actively disliked. I was underwhelmed by the Eternals. Um, and I wasn't really a big fan of Secret Invasion just now on Disney Plus. I just felt like, okay, what was the point of that? Um, but for the most part, I've liked it, and some of it I have absolutely adored. I loved the Guardians of the Galaxy movies. I loved them. I've really enjoyed the Captain America movies. I think the MCU Spider-Man is terrific. I thought Captain Marvel was good. I thought Black Panther was genius. The first one, the second Black Panther was all right. It was, given the circumstances, I think they did a good job, and there were some elements of it that I thought were excellent. But the first Black Panther I thought was tremendous. Um, so yeah, for the overall, I'm a big fan of the MCU, and I think it's stunning that they have managed to stunning and impressive in a creative aspect and in like just a commercial aspect that they've managed to keep it going as long as they have. Um, Kemp, as far as I know, they're still planning on coming out with a Blade series. Um, at some point. Oh, David, I agree with you about Star Trek Beyond. I think Star Trek Beyond is the best of the Kelvin movies, and it's way high up on my list of favorites. It might be my third favorite. It's either my third or fourth favorite Star Trek movie. Like it's fantastic. I love Star Trek Beyond. Um, Brian, didn't they have the fight music from TOS in an episode of Strange New Worlds? Didn't they do in Spock Amok last season when Spock had like the dream of fighting on Vulcan like in Amok Time? Didn't they use the fight music for that? Or am I dreaming that? I can't remember. Um, 255 AD says that video you made the other day. Do you not think there are some elected Republicans who are true believers? No, there are some. I agree. Um, there are some, but the point that I always make is it doesn't matter. Like, because sometimes I think we can get sort of sidetracked with the argument of, well, are they all just grifters or do they believe what they're saying? And some of them do, some of them don't, would be my guess. But ultimately, it doesn't matter. because the harm they cause is the same whether they mean what they say or they don't. You know, their actions and the impact of their words and their actions are the same either way. Um, 25580. Let me go back and see what your last comment was. Oh, I already. That's the one I just. That's the one I just responded to. Do, do, do. Steve Schmeling, wrestling question. What did you think of the Stone Cold run over by Rikishi story arc? Uh, a missed opportunity, and just felt like they were making it up as they went along and not in a good way. You know, I think they thought maybe they could use it to elevate Rikishi to a higher level, and that didn't work out. So when it became obvious that that wasn't going to work, they blew that part of it off as quickly as they could and just had Austin beat Rikishi like on an episode of Raw or something. And then they transferred that over to Triple H, and they revealed, Triple H was the mastermind behind it all. And then Austin versus Triple H was much more successful going forward. But no, I mean, and part of what made it so underwhelming is that it was basically housekeeping, you know, like they had Austin get hit by the car in the first place to explain why he wasn't going to be around because he had to leave to get surgery. And then, it took him so long. He was out for like a year or something, wasn't he? And when he finally came back, honestly, they probably would have been better off just reintroducing him with something new instead of going back to who ran him over. They probably would have been better off just like if they wanted to get to Austin versus Triple H eventually, they probably would have been better off just give Austin something else to do to reintroduce him, give him somebody to beat. I mean, it could even be Rikishi, whatever. But the whole, look who it was who drove the car, like, it was housekeeping. It was okay. Now Austin's back. We need to bring him back in. We need to give him a storyline to sort of re-enter with. Let's go back to the car that hit him and solve that mystery. Like, okay. Not Austin's best storyline. David Colby, Star Trek fans don't deserve a love letter. We need a show that gives them what they need, which is new characters on a new ship doing new things with new aliens, also communism. It's funny. I was thinking about this earlier today, and this is a recurring thought that I have, right? Because I get this in response whenever I say that I don't like Lower Decks specifically. And I know you like Lower Decks, so I'm not trying to start shit with you about Lower Decks. This is just an example. When I say that I don't like Lower Decks, sometimes Lower Decks fans will come back with, well, but Lower Decks, even if you don't think it's funny, even if it doesn't work with you as a comedy, you have to appreciate it because it's just a love letter to Star Trek. Or when I complain about the amount of nostalgia in Picard season 3 and how poorly that whole thing is put together and whatever, they'll say like, yeah, but they have all the callbacks and all the nostalgia because it's like a love letter to Star Trek. I don't want love letters from Star Trek. Well, I don't here's what I want. I don't want love letters to Star Trek from Star Trek. That's the part that really bugs me. Like, it's Star Trek writing a love letter to itself saying, isn't Star Trek awesome? Like, just make good Star Trek. And this goes with everything. Like, I don't want fucking love letters to stuff, okay? Love letters are things that fans write. If you're making a show, if you're making a comic book, if you're making a movie, whatever, and you're dealing with some beloved property that's been around forever, don't make a fucking love letter to it. Make a good story. If I never see another quote unquote love letter to something ever again, it'll be too soon. I'm so tired of this self-congratulatory pandering, like, oh, it's a love letter. It's a love letter to Star Trek. I don't want a fucking love letter to Star Trek. I want good Star Trek. Like I always say, the best fan service is a good fucking show. So once again, we are in agreement. It's just the Strange New Worlds thing that we can't, we'll be enemies for life for that. But everything else, we're like, we have the same fucking brain. Um, Isaiah, you know what? I've never seen 2012, so I have no thoughts on the movie. Um, yeah, me no other. Grifters inspire even if they don't believe. Exactly. Um, Stephen Clinard says Star Trek fans don't deserve a love letter, but I'm 100% down for a celebrity roast. Someone mentioned Brian, I think, mentioned Harley Quinn earlier. I was watching the new episode of Harley Quinn, and I thought, if Lower Decks treated Star Trek the way Harley Quinn treats Batman, I might like Lower Decks more because Harley Quinn. First of all, Harley Quinn isn't nearly as reliant on like specific references and callbacks and nostalgia as Lower Decks is with Star Trek. But Harley Quinn does have, it uses a lot of established Batman stuff and Batman characters. And there are in jokes, about Batman stuff a lot in Harley Quinn. But when Harley Quinn makes fun of Batman and Batman stories and Batman lore, etc., it is fucking merciless. Like it goes for the throat in a way that Lower Decks never does. Like Lower Decks will occasionally sort of poke at something dumb in Star Trek and go, "Ha, this is silly, right?" But it's not like Harley Quinn is fucking savage to Batman in a way that Lower Decks just has never had the guts to be with Star Trek. And when I see Harley Quinn doing that and again, I love Batman. I love Batman as much as I love Star Trek. And when I see Harley Quinn going after Batman like that and scoring so well and being so goddamn funny, I wish that Lower Decks had teeth like that when it goes after Star Trek because it just doesn't. Like it just doesn't. It's too affectionate. It's too affectionate. It's too much of a love letter. Like Harley Quinn is not a love letter to Batman. It is a goddamn funny cartoon show about Batman that makes fun of Batman but is also about Batman stuff and it's orders of magnitude better. Here's another super chat from Fat Produce. Thank you very much. Tendi and Rutherford are the avatars of modern Trek and the heart of Lower Decks. They are the embodiment of Starfleet and Trek more than Boimler and Mariner. Well, look, Rutherford is my favorite character on the show, but mainly because Rutherford almost always gets the funny stuff. I can when I think of the funniest bits that I can just remember off the top of my head from Lower Decks, they're almost all Rutherford bits. So he's my favorite character for that because he's one of the only characters that that has managed to make me laugh. The other characters, it's a comedy show. It doesn't make me laugh for the most part. So I tend to take a dim view of it. Brian Baker says, have you considered doing a video about the price professional wrestlers pay for the job? No, but that would be a good topic. If I could figure out something more specific to say about it, then I think that would be an excellent topic. Yes, absolutely. Especially like the price that modern wrestlers pay by working such a ridiculously dangerous style when they don't need to. They're making it even more dangerous than it needs to be. Okay, 255 AD. Let me go back and find your last two comments here. With regard to my relationship with my parents, I get disability and my parents support me otherwise, so there's no possibility of me moving. Well, that's kind of what I thought the situation was. So I'm sorry to hear that. And then I don't want you to see that question, but if it's out there, I might as well share that. I didn't want you to see that question, but it was okay. Well, I'm glad you added some context to that. Me No Other says better to make a show 100 years on like the 26th or 33rd century. I mean, that is one way to do it, but honestly, it does it like I've said before when people have asked, if the blue fairy came down and granted my wish and I got to write a Star Trek show and I could make it however I wanted. It wouldn't matter what era it was set in. You can set a Star Trek show in the 23rd century or the 24th century or the 22nd century. It doesn't matter. if you just write the show about what you want it to be about. Just because you set a show in roughly the same time period as Star Trek The Next Generation, for instance, that doesn't mean your show just has to have a bunch of rehashes of TNG stuff. It doesn't have to be just a bunch of follow-ups and sequels and revisitations of TNG stuff. You can still make it your show about your stories. Like, that's the important thing, not the setting. Like, sure, you can do that. You can do what TNG did and say, let's just set it a century later and just have a clean slate. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with doing that. But you don't have to do that. You can set the show. It's a made-up universe. You can set the show in whatever time period you want. And just, if you don't want it to mention stuff from TNG, then you just don't mention stuff from TNG when you write the episodes. It's not that fucking hard, you know? Hand of Omega asks, was making the main character of Discovery, not the captain, a good idea or a bad idea? A good idea. No, a good idea. Here's a super chat from David Colby. And after this, I'm going to start wrapping up. So if anybody has final thoughts or final questions, go ahead and start thinking of them and putting them in the chat, and I'll take another pass through after I get my closing wrapped up. But David says in the super chat, I have to scream, the galaxy is big. You can set your Star Trek show in the exact same date at the exact same days as TNG, and the characters will never meet or even hear about each other. Space is huge. Yes, exactly. Exactly. That is exactly what I think. You can set it 100 years later, but you don't have to. You can just write a show set in the same universe about different stuff. That's completely fine. Yeah, and Brian, that's a great point. DS9 never did a Borg show. You never saw the Borg, and other than the flashback to Wolf 359 in the pilot to establish that part of Sisko's backstory. After that, you never saw the Borg. And other than occasional mentions, in relation to like comparing them to like the threat that the Dominion represented, or Sisko mentioning that the Defiant was designed to fight the Borg, like other than a very occasional fleeting references, characters didn't even talk about the Borg in Deep Space Nine. The Borg did not exist in Deep Space Nine for all intents and purposes. And it took place during the events of the last few years of TNG and the events of First Contact, which was all about the Borg invading Earth. And somehow Deep Space Nine got by without having a bunch of Borg stuff in it. Go figure. Anyway, let me wrap up real quick, and then I'll come back to the chat for one last time. First of all, I see Some Random Geek was putting in the links to help out some friends of his, Joanna in Phoenix, etc. Those are also at charitylinks.page, which is linked in the description of this live stream. Please make use of that if you possibly can to help out some friends of ours who need a helping hand. I would strongly encourage you to do that. Also, don't forget, if you want to support my channel and the work I do on YouTube, you can become a patron at patreon.com/Steve Shives, or become a member by clicking the join button. Either way helps me out tremendously. I could not do this that I do without my patrons and my members. So thank you all so much for being patrons and for being members and for your support. I really, really appreciate it. And I'm humbled that you consider me worthy of it. And if you do become a patron or a member at any level, one of the benefits is you get to submit questions ahead of time for these Ask Away live streams. So that's something to consider if you're wondering, well, sure, I'll give you a few bucks every month, Steve, but what's in it for me? Well, one of the things that's in it for you is you get to submit questions ahead of time for Ask Away if you like. So click the join button or patreon.com/Steve Shives. Thank you all so much for your support. Also, if you enjoy my YouTube work, you might enjoy the podcasts that I am a co-host on that are a part of the Let Me Listen family of podcasts. There is Late Seating, the movie review podcast that I co-host alongside the brilliant Jason Harding, where we take a look at classic films and see if they live up to their reputation, whether it's good or bad. Our new episode is up this week. It is our review, speaking of Werner Herzog, of the classic Werner Herzog film Fitzcarraldo. You can hear Jason and my review of Fitzcarraldo right now on the new episode of Late Seating. And there is also the Ensign's Log podcast, which is the Star Trek themed comedy podcast that I am on alongside Jason and the brilliant, wonderful Dana Cole, who is usually in the chat with us for these live streams, but is not with us tonight because she is currently at rehearsal for a show that she is doing. She's in a live theater production of Shakespeare in Love, and she is currently at rehearsals for that. So we miss Dana and we wish her luck on her rehearsal tonight and the show in general. But yes, that is the Ensign's Log with Dana and Jason and myself, where we play characters who are, speaking of doing a Star Trek show that is set at the same time as another Star Trek show, we do our show that is the events of our show take place concurrent to the events of Star Trek The Next Generation. But our show is mostly about our stuff and our characters and our adventures and misadventures. So if you enjoy my Star Trek stuff and you enjoy Star Trek stuff with a comedic bent to it, check out the Ensign's Log. Links in the description. And if you do check out the podcasts, I hope you enjoy them. Okay, let's take one last look at the live chat before I wrap this baby up. Let me see. Knit and Crochet Tiger says, if I could create a Star Trek show, I'd set it between 2,800 and 3,000. Do the post-temporal war accords, but pre-burned. That way there will be no legacy characters. Fresh slate. There you go. Again, you could totally do that. But, you know, you could also set it in any other era and have no legacy characters if that's what you chose to do. But yeah, that would be a perfectly fine choice to do. Caitlin says, do you think you'd have liked Enterprise better if they'd been allowed to do their original plan, spend all of season 1 building and testing the ship, then finally exploring in season 2? I mean, that's hard to say. You're kind of imagining like a completely different show. I don't think there's any reason why Enterprise, as they actually did it, couldn't have been good. I think it comes down to just they needed better scripts, they needed better stories, they needed to draw their characters in a clearer, more compelling way. Like, I mean, doing an entire season of the build up to the launch, that could have been interesting. And I tell you what, it definitely would have been different. It would have had that advantage of doing something that we had not seen a version of on a Star Trek show before. So that definitely could have worked better. Isaiah Taylor, I haven't seen The Day After Tomorrow either, so I can't give you an opinion on that either. I'm sorry, man. I haven't seen these movies that you're asking me to opine on. Yes, me no other. Tawny Newsome. Tawny Newsome is who plays Mariner, and yes, she is writing for the Star Trek Academy show, and she's great. She's brilliant. I'm a big fan of hers. She's been in other stuff as well. So I'm looking forward to the Academy show, especially knowing that she's a writer on it. She's terrific. Yeah, Hand of Omega, that's another example. The TNG writers made a very deliberate decision to not reference or touch on TOS related stuff. And I think that was a very good decision. And I think other Star Trek shows should do the same thing. So yeah. All right, I think that's it. Thank you everybody for being with me once again. I will see you. Dana and I will not be doing Trek Reluctantly again this coming week because that will be Tech Week for her show, so she won't be available. So I won't see you for that. We'll be back week after next for Trek Reluctantly. But I'll see you next week for the usual videos, and then I'll see you in 2 weeks for another one of these. So thank you all so much for hanging out with me. Thank you all so much for the super chats and the questions in the chat, and for being patrons and members, and all of the great questions there. And thanks for a great show that I could not have done without you. Have a good night. Have a good weekend, and I will see you next time. Bye, everybody.